Once, Kody Brown was the center of a sprawling universe. 4 wives, 18 children, a household so large it filled multiple homes. A family so unusual it became a television phenomenon. He was the sun that the whole system orbited. And now, in his late 50s, let's look honestly at where Kody Brown actually stands. 1 wife remaining, many of his children are distant, a public that has largely turned against him, a reputation in pieces. The man who once had everything a plural patriarch could want is, by every visible measure, more alone than he has ever been. So tonight, for the final chapter of this whole story, I don't want to gloat, and I don't want to pile on. I want to do something harder and more honest. I want to look at Kody Brown's reckoning as what it really is, a human cautionary tale. Let me begin by tracing the arc, because the distance between where he started and where he ended is the whole story. At the height of it, Kody was at the center of an enormous family. Whatever its dysfunctions, it was full, it was busy, it was alive with the chaos of many wives and many children. That was the life he chose, the life he built, the life he defended to a skeptical world for 2 decades. And then, piece by piece, it came apart. Christine left, Janelle pulled away, Mary stepped back, many of the kids drifted. And what remains is a dramatically smaller world. 1 wife, a fraction of the closeness he once had, a life that has contracted from a bustling compound to something far quieter and far lonelier. The arc is from the center of everything to the edge of almost everything. That's a steep fall. Now, I want to be clear about the spirit of this, because it would be easy to make this a victory lap, and I don't think that's right. There's a temptation, given everything we've documented, the favoritism, the money, the way he treated the wives and kids, to simply celebrate Kody's downfall as just desserts. And look, there's an argument that he earned every bit of this. We'll get to that. But I think the more honest and more human response to watching a man end up alone in the ruins of the life he built is not glee. It's something closer to a sober, cautionary sadness. Because whatever his failures, this is still a human being reaping a devastating harvest. And there's a lesson in that harvest that's more valuable than any gloating could ever be. The cautionary tale is worth more than the victory lap. So let me lay out the case that he earned it, because intellectual honesty requires it. Across this whole series, we've documented a pattern, the favoritism that seemed to consistently advantage 1 wife and 1 household, the money that flowed in one direction, the unpaid debts, the unequal payouts, the self-centeredness that showed up even in his apologies and confessions, the failures of presence that left so many of his children feeling secondary. If a man treats the people around him in those ways for long enough, the natural consequence is that those people eventually leave or pull away. Kody's isolation isn't a random misfortune that befell him. It's the harvest of seeds he planted over decades. In that sense, yes, this is a man living with the direct consequences of his own choices. He built this outcome, 1 decision at a time. But here's where the cautionary tale becomes more than just an indictment, because the lesson isn't really about Kody being uniquely bad. It's about something universal and frightening. Kody didn't set out to end up alone. No one does. He presumably believed at every step that he was making reasonable choices, that his perspective was right, that things would work out. And that's the scary part. The road to ending up alone in the ruins of your own life isn't usually paved with cartoonish villainy. It's paved with 1,000 smaller choices. Self-centeredness here, a failure of presence there, prioritizing yourself over the people who needed you, all while believing you were basically in the right. Kody is a cautionary tale precisely because his failures were ordinary human failures, magnified by his unusual circumstances and a television camera. That's what makes him a mirror, not just a villain. Let me sit with loneliness specifically, because I think it's the heart of the final chapter. Imagine being surrounded, for most of your adult life, by a huge family, and then watching it steadily empty out around you. Imagine your children, one after another, growing distant. Imagine 3 of the 4 women who once shared your life building happier lives without you, and the public that once found your family fascinating, turning that fascination into criticism. Imagine reaching your late 50s, an age when many people are surrounded by the warmth of the family they cultivated, and finding yourself instead in a much quieter, much emptier version of the life you imagined. That's profound loneliness. And whatever you think Cody deserves, loneliness like that is a heavy thing for any human being to carry. I want to talk about the role of self-awareness in all of this, because it's the variable that determines whether a cautionary tale ends in tragedy or redemption. The saddest version of Cody's story is one where he never fully understands how he got here, where he continues to see himself as the wronged party, the misunderstood patriarch, the victim of wives who left and kids who don't appreciate him. If that's where he stays, then the isolation is permanent, because you can't fix a problem you won't acknowledge. The more hopeful version is one where the loss finally breaks through, where being alone forces the honest self-reckoning that all his years of explaining never allowed. We saw hints of both in the apology tour. Genuine glimmers of awareness tangled up with the old deflection. Which one wins will determine the actual ending of this man's story. Let me offer a genuinely sympathetic reading, because I think this whole story deserves at least one moment of real compassion for the man at its center. It is possible that Cody is, right now, going through the hardest and most clarifying period of his life, that the collapse of everything is forcing him to see things he spent decades unable to see, that somewhere in the quiet of his shrunken world, a real reckoning is happening. And if that's true, then there's something almost redemptive in it. A man finally, painfully, growing into wisdom through loss. That would be the best possible ending. Not that Cody gets his old life back, that's gone, but that he becomes, in his final chapters, a wiser and more humble version of himself. Loss can do that to people, if they let it. I genuinely hope, for his sake and his family's, that it does. But let me also be realistic, because hope shouldn't curdle into naivety. Change at this stage of life, after a lifetime of patterns, is hard and rare. Many people, faced with the consequences of their choices, double down on self-justification rather than embracing growth, because the alternative, fully facing what you did, is almost unbearable. So the more likely outcome, statistically, is that Cody continues much as he has, telling himself a version of events in which he's more sinned against than sinning, never quite crossing the bridge to real change. That would be the true tragedy. Not just that he ended up alone, but that he ended up alone and never understood why. A cautionary tale is saddest when its subject never learns the lesson it teaches everyone else. Let me extract that lesson directly, because it's the most valuable thing this entire saga has to offer, and it applies to every single one of us watching. The people in our lives are not guaranteed. The love and presence of our partners, our children, our families, these things are not entitlements that persist no matter how we behave. They are cultivated or they are squandered, built through how we treat people day after day, or eroded by self-centeredness and neglect. Cody had an abundance of family, and through the accumulation of his choices, much of it slipped away. The lesson for the rest of us is urgent and clear. Do not take the people who love you for granted. Show up for them, prioritize them, treat them well, consistently, before the consequences of not doing so become irreversible. Cody's empty house is a warning, and we'd be wise to heed it while our own houses are still full. So when I step back and look at Kody Brown at this stage of his life, here's what I see. I see a man who once stood at the center of a vast family and now stands largely alone in its ruins. I see consequences that he, by the accumulation of his own choices, genuinely earned. But I also see a human cautionary tale that's bigger than him, a warning about how self-centeredness and neglect, practiced quietly over years while you believe you're in the right, can cost you everything that matters. I see a man at a crossroads between a redemptive reckoning and a permanent, uncomprehending isolation. And I see, in his story, a mirror held up to all of us, asking whether we're cultivating the relationships that matter or quietly squandering them. That, in the end, is what makes Kody Brown's story worth telling. Not the spectacle of his fall, but the warning embedded in it. Let me make the contrast vivid with a single image, because I think it captures everything. Picture a holiday at the height of the Brown family. Multiple wives, a house full of children. Noise, chaos, abundance, a table that could barely contain everyone. Now picture a holiday in Cody's life as it stands today. The table is so much emptier. So many of the seats that were once filled are now elsewhere. With Christine and David, with Janelle and her grown kids, with Mary and her new chapter, with children who've grown distant. The difference between those two holiday tables, The full one of the past and the sparse one of the present is the difference between the life Cody had and the life his choices left him. And there's almost nothing sadder than an empty seat at a table that was once overflowing. Now, in fairness, Cody is not entirely alone, and we should acknowledge what he still has. He has Robin, his one remaining wife, who has stayed. He has his youngest children, the ones in his current household, who are still being raised under his roof. So this isn't a portrait of total abandonment. He has a family, just a much smaller one than he once did. But here's the haunting question that hangs over even what remains. Is it enough? Is the life he has left the life he wanted, or just the fragment of it that didn't leave? And we discussed in another chapter the complicated possibility that even his marriage to Robin carries its own quiet uncertainties. So even what Cody still has comes with question marks. The fullness is gone, and what remains may not be the rich reward it appears to be from the outside. I think we have to talk about the public dimension, because it's a unique and painful part of Cody's particular reckoning. Most people who end up estranged from family do so privately. Cody's estrangement plays out in front of millions. Not only have many of his family members pulled away, but the audience that once found him fascinating has largely turned on him, casting him as the villain of his own show. So Cody isn't just experiencing the private grief of a fractured family. He's experiencing the public humiliation of being widely disliked, dissected, and criticized by an audience of strangers, including channels like this one. That's a layer of consequence most people never have to face. Whatever his failures, there's something uniquely brutal about having your personal downfall become public entertainment. It's a price few of us could imagine paying. And that public turning connects to the grandchildren we discussed, because the isolation isn't just horizontal, it's generational. Cody is a grandfather many times over, and as we explored, the distance from his adult children likely extends to many of his grandchildren too. So loneliness isn't only about the present, it's about the future. It's about a whole generation of descendants who may grow up barely knowing him. When you imagine Cody's later years, you have to imagine not just a smaller present, but a diminished future. Fewer of the grandchildren's visits and milestones, and ordinary joys that make a person's later life rich. The contraction of his world isn't finished. By the logic of the estrangements, it may continue to shrink in the years ahead, unless something changes. Here's an irony I can't get past, because it's almost poetically cruel. Cody's whole philosophy for decades was that love isn't a pie. Loving one person, he insisted, doesn't take away from loving another. There's always enough to go around. That was the spiritual foundation of the entire plural marriage worldview. And yet, look at how it ended. The family fractured, in large part over the perception that love and resources weren't distributed equally, that some got more of the pie than others. The man who preached that love was infinite ended up surrounded by people who felt they'd received too little of it. His own central philosophy was, in the end, contradicted by the lived experience of the people closest to him. The pie metaphor came back to haunt him. There wasn't enough to go around after all, at least not in the way it actually got served. So, is the apology tour the beginning of his reckoning, or just another performance? We've examined that question on its own, but here, in the final chapter, it takes on its fullest weight. Because the apology tour may be the hinge on which Cody's entire ending turns. If it represents the genuine beginning of self-awareness, then maybe, just maybe, this is the start of a wiser, humbler final act, one where he does the slow work of rebuilding what can be rebuilt. If it's just another way of managing his image while avoiding real accountability, then it's the sound of a man still not understanding, and the isolation will simply deepen. Everything we've discussed about this family converges on that single question. Will Cody finally see clearly, or won't he? His ending depends entirely on the answer, and only he can provide it. Let me reflect on aging and regret, because that's really the universal frame for Cody's final chapter. There's a particular kind of pain reserved for looking back, late in life, at choices you can't undo. The younger version of us makes decisions believing we have endless time to fix things, endless chances to make it right. And then one day we're older, the chances have narrowed, and we're living with the accumulated weight of how we treated people when we thought time was infinite. Cody is in that territory now. The decisions are made, the wives have left, the kids have grown. Much of it can't be redone. And whatever reckoning he's capable of has to happen against the hard reality that some doors have already closed. That's the sober truth of regret in later life. You can grow, you can change, but you can't get back the years you spent getting it wrong. And yet, I don't want to leave this entirely without hope, because no human story is fully over while the person is still living it. Even now, even this late, Cody has choices. He can choose genuine humility over self-justification. He can choose to do the patient, unglamorous work of trying to rebuild trust with the children still willing to let him. He can choose to be a present grandfather to whatever grandchildren he can reach. None of it would restore the full life he lost, but it could make his remaining chapters meaningfully better than his recent ones. The story of Kody Brown isn't finished, and the ending isn't fully written. He still holds the pen for the final pages. What he writes with it, redemption or further isolation, is the last open question of this entire saga. And honestly, after everything, I find myself hoping he chooses the harder, better path for the sake of everyone, including himself. Because in the end, that's what this entire story has been about. Beneath all the drama, the money, the tell-alls, and the headlines, it's been about a simple, ancient truth that Kody Brown is now living out in the hardest possible way. The way you treat the people who love you determines whether you spend your later years surrounded by them or apart from them. Cody had as much family as a person could ever ask for, and the slow erosion of it, through choices that seemed small in the moment, left him where he is now. If his story teaches us anything, it's that the warmth of a full life isn't something you're owed. It's something you earn. Quietly, every single day, in how you show up for the people who are counting on you. That's the lesson buried in Kody Brown's empty rooms, and it's the one worth carrying out of this whole story and into our own lives. So I'll turn it over to you for this final chapter, and I really want your honest, thoughtful take. Do you feel any genuine sympathy for Cody at this point, or do you believe he earned every bit of where he's ended up? And here's the bigger question, the one I most want you to sit with in the comments. What's the lesson you personally take from Kody Brown's story about your own life and the people in it? Tell me, because this is the conversation that makes all of this matter beyond just the drama, and I read every single comment. If you want me to do a complete retrospective on the entire rise and fall of the Brown family, the whole 20-season arc as one human story, let me know, and I'll build it as a proper finale. And if you've stuck with this channel through all of it, thank you. Genuinely. Subscribe if you haven't, because we'll keep telling this family's story with honesty and with heart, all the way to wherever it ends. Until next time, take care of the people who love you. That, more than anything, is the whole point.